Welcome to Postcards, a brief look at people, places, the arts and curiosities from around the world. On today's program, top quality art and antiques for sale at Barda's annual fair. Every little girl's dream doll, Barbie, gets a glamorous makeover by Europe's top designers. A special exhibition to mark the centenary of the death of one of the most famous figures of the Victorian era. A unique collection of gold, silver and mosaics bequeathed to Britain by Californian businessman Sir Arthur Gilbert. And nestled in a sleepy seaside village in Britain, the biggest marine science centre in Europe. But first up, Christie's auction house in London was transformed into a shrine last week. A shrine to the worship of one club, Manchester United. Devotees of the famous English football club from around the world could bid in person or via TV for pictures like this of the stars that have played over the years for Manchester United, the current European champions. This shirt, worn by Manchester and England star Bobby Charlton in the 1966 World Cup semi-final against Portugal, was expected to be the biggest attraction. England went on to win the championship. But in fact, these boots, worn by today's Manchester star David Beckham, were the biggest attraction. Tipped to fetch $1,600 US, they went for over $22,000. These two pairs of goalkeeper Peter Schmeichel's gloves were snapped up by a fan for just over $1,000, double the expected price. Auction houses are realising that football shirts, programs and medals are pieces of history that can bring in money as readily as fine art. But not all the items carry big price tags. Christie's is also able to offer cheaper items, realising that there's young people coming into the collector's market now. The sale wasn't just for Manchester United fans though. This shirt was worn by Italian striker Luigi Colossi in the 1938 World Cup final against Hungary, where he scored twice. Demand was high for players' medals, shirts and caps from the domestic British football scene too. This Ireland international cap from the 1962-63 season fetched $2,024, double the asking price. Football sales like this look like being permanent fixtures on the auction calendar, as long as people remain passionate about the game and want to own a part of its rich history. The Antiques and Fine Arts Fair dispels the popular cliché of antiques as dusty pictures and rickety furniture stuck at the back of a dingy shop. 90 of Britain's top antiques dealers are showing the cream of their furniture, paintings, glassware and other works of art. It's a very international fair which attracts not only the local English market, but the American and European. Much of the furniture, ceramics, textiles and paintings are laid out in finished interiors, and the interior design theme is a thread running through the series of talks, dinners and events taking place. Not everything is up for sale. These pieces of English and Irish silverware from the Rococo period are on loan from the Ashmolean Museum in Oxford. The small curved lines and prettiness of the pieces is typical of this decorative style that originated in France. This 18th century Chippendale-style library table is one of the most expensive pieces, priced at $192,000 US. To impress your chess-playing friends, this ebony and rosewood games table from 1820 will set you back $29,000. There are also very decorative garden tools starting about $120. At the top end of the furniture market, you could buy a pair of George III beechwood armchairs for around $320,000. Forgeries are the bane of the art market, but all the dealers here, members of the British Antique Dealers Association, guarantee the authenticity of the items they're selling at this annual showcase of the antiques business. Supermodel Barbie, a fashion icon. Now top designers are competing with each other to design clothes for the blonde doll. The list of contributors to a new London exhibition in which Barbie wears designer clothes reads like a who's who of the fashion world. Barbie wears Alexander McQueen. Is light and elegant in Prada. Vibrant and exciting in Palamo Picasso. She shows off film star looks in Versace, is classic in Mulligan, and spices it up in posh Maria Grushvogel. But Barbie is also a much maligned and sometimes controversial figure. Parents and feminists are not always keen to see her as a role model. Barbie is adventurous in Paul Smith. Beautiful in Jasper Conran, grown up in Catherine Hamnett. So many talents, so many looks, it must be hard to choose a favourite. A problem, no doubt, for the long-suffering Ken. Gallery manager Alan Hamilton's favourite is Jean-Paul Gaultier. Not only is he outfitted Barbie, but Ken as well, in kilt and Breton sweater. Gaultier also bored Barbie up to the minute with body piercing. When the exhibition at Proud Galleries closes, the collection will be sold at auction to raise money for the Elton John AIDS Foundation. Finally, there's a dreaming Barbie, thinking of Ken and the future. London turned on its best weather to unveil a very public piece of artwork in a very public place. Trafalgar Square, famed for its pigeons and fountains, is getting a new piece of sculpture on its fourth plinth. British sculptor Bill Woodrow's Regardless of History is on display in the space set aside for a series of temporary sculptures. The sculptor has employed bronze and used classical symbols, a huge head, a book symbolising knowledge, and a tree whose roots branch out embracing the plinth. "30 pieces were cast separately and fixed together like a giant jigsaw puzzle. Regardless of History weighs 11 tonnes and towers 7 metres above the plinth. The challenge was to marry the new work with the existing statues in the square. Woodrow says his piece nicely enters a dialogue with them. Another difficulty lay in the necessity to incorporate the plinth, sculptures on plinths, having been out of fashion for some time. Regardless of History will remain in the space until the autumn. The temporary commissions bring a new personality to Trafalgar Square, often igniting a new debate about art in public places. At the Tate Gallery in London, a special exhibition has opened to mark the centenary of the death of one of the most famous figures of the Victorian era. John Ruskin was a critic of art and society. His writings are credited with influencing Gandhi and Tolstoy. But it is his role in promoting the art of his time that is being remembered here. Turner is celebrated now as one of the greatest artists of the 19th century Europe. But paintings like his Slavers Throwing Overboard the Dead and Dying, a powerful indictment of the slave trade, were dismissed as soapsuds and jam by critics until John Ruskin championed his cause. Ruskin also defended the pre-Raphaelite painters, so called because they wanted to get back to a principle of art that predated the Renaissance artist Raphael. Old-fashioned maybe today, this was the avant-garde of Victorian England. Ruskin travelled widely, and wherever he went, he sketched. Many of the drawings he made, particularly from trips to Switzerland and Italy, form part of the exhibition. His detailed drawings he made of the city of Venice, from small canal-side houses to the Grand Basilica of St Mark's, are particularly famous and form an important historical archive in themselves. 150 years later, the buildings have all been restored, and Ruskin's drawings were able to be used as historical records of what the buildings looked like. But it is as a critic and social commentator that Ruskin enjoys a worldwide reputation, anticipating what we today think of as a thoroughly modern concern, environmentalism. Somerset House, one of the great riverside houses in central London, has long languished as government offices full of tax files. Now it's set to become one of the greatest art centres in Europe. A unique collection of gold, silver and mosaics, conservatively valued at $240 million US, has been bequeathed to Britain by Californian businessman Sir Arthur Gilbert, who was born and brought up in London. It's a stunning collection. The mosaics and micro-mosaics are spectacular. An all but forgotten art form, pictures are constructed entirely out of individual coloured pieces of stone and marble. It includes this panoramic view of Rome, copied from an etching. Unsigned, it was said to have taken 20 years to complete. From the grand statement to miniature craftsmanship, these 18th century gold boxes were made for European heads of state, including Louis XV, Napoleon and the Empresses of Russia. For Sir Arthur Gilbert, a sprightly 86, his collection is returning to the people. There are some very unusual objects on display, like this silver howdah or chair for riding on an elephant. And some magnificent and ornate timepieces. When the collection opens to the public, it will undoubtedly enhance Somerset House as an important cultural centre. A search spanning more than half a century ended this week in London when an oil painting, The Three Stages of Life, by German secessionist Leopold von Kalkreuth, was given back to a British family. It was the first piece of Nazi-looted art to be returned in Britain. The painting was a wedding gift for Mrs. von Gotthilf, later Glanville, in 1924. Within days of the Anschluss in Austria in 1938, the von Gotthilfs, Catholics of Jewish descent, were thrown out of their home by the Nazis and forced to scrub pavements with toothbrushes. Their possessions, including the painting, were seized. Ernest and Marietta were young children when their parents fled with them to Britain. They thought their mother's quest to recover the painting was lost in 1973, when authorities in Berlin told the family the deadline for restitution had expired in 1948. But hope was revived when the case was referred to the Commission for Looted Art in Europe last year. 3 to 4 months were spent in research and obtaining all documentation. 10 weeks after the claim was submitted, news came that the painting was to be returned. The Stages of Life had found its way into the Bavarian State Collection and is currently on loan to Britain's Royal Academy as part of its Art at the Crossroads exhibition. After the exhibition is shown at New York's Guggenheim Museum, the painting will be returned to its rightful owners. This will be the first painting that has been restituted in England. The British government is currently setting up an advisory committee to deal with similar claims on works of art in British museums and galleries. Down House in Kent in southeast England, once the home of Britain's greatest naturalist, Charles Darwin. And along this path the famous scientist would stroll, wrestling with the concept of evolution, kicking these Kentish flintstones as he walked. Today, the flints have a different purpose. They're to be used in a topping out ceremony attended by Sarah Darwin, his great-great-granddaughter. It's the completion of the highest point of Phase 1 of the Natural History Museum's radically new Darwin Centre. complex will provide public access to the museum's 12 million zoological specimens. The museum has been awarded a $16 million US grant towards the cost of Phase 2 of the Darwin Centre, which will rehouse the insect and botanic collections. It will give visitors unprecedented access to an area of scientific work that is rarely seen. It could be any sleepy seaside village in Britain, but this complex, nestled between the island of Anglesey and the mainland of North Wales, is a centre for an important study of the world's oceans. Bangor University's Ocean Sciences Unit is the biggest marine science centre in Europe and one of 2 centres of excellence in the United Kingdom. A unit at Southampton concentrates on deep ocean systems, while Bangor is concerned with so-called shelf sea systems, those closer to our shorelines and perhaps the most important of the oceanic regions. These students are part of an eminent tradition of marine sciences at Bangor, which dates back to 1948. During the 1970s and 80s, Bangor University captured world attention with its research into the way tidal stirring interacts with solar radiation. The team unravelled the fundamental control mechanism of shelf sea systems, identifying major oceanographic boundaries with patterns of activity which act a bit like weather fronts. Interesting from a physics point of view, these features represent a very interesting balance between heating and stirring. But they're also important from a biological point of view, because they're the focus of enhanced production. They are the preferred regions for the phytoplankton, the plants of the ocean, to grow and produce the base of the food chain, which feeds up through the zooplankton and into fisheries. A resource which sets Bangor apart from other similar institutions is this dedicated research vessel. The Prince Madog has made numerous scientific voyages to places like the Philippines and Madagascar, among others, for fieldwork and detailed research. The university's demands on the 17-year-old vessel, though, have now outstripped its capacity. A major fundraising effort has attracted financial backing for a new, bigger ship with larger accommodation and enabling interdisciplinary work at sea. Dr. John Turner has only recently returned from such a field trip to the world's equatorial region, where he discovered a devastation of coral reefs. Recent climatic fluctuations have caused widespread mortality of coral in the Caribbean, the Atlantic, Indian and Pacific Oceans through a process called bleaching. These are healthy reefs, brimming with marine life. The corals of microscopic algae living in their tissue, which photosynthesizes, producing food for the coral. The coral is the algae's host, and the two have a symbiotic relationship which forms the basis of the reef ecosystem. But when increased direct sunlight warms up the waters, the coral can become stressed. When the coral gets very stressed, the association between the algae and the animal breaks down, and the coral often gets rid of the algae. It expels them from the cells, and as a result of this, the coral loses the browny yellowy colour that it often has and becomes bright white. In fact, it becomes more like porcelain, and eventually it will just become brittle and crack away. This is the result of bleaching. On certain reefs, a worrying 80% of corals have died, and the fragile survivors now require urgent protection. Overfishing, the dropping of anchors on corals, nutrient runoff entering the seas, and pollution from pleasure boats all serve to weaken the reef. When water temperatures return to normal, new corals will try to re-establish themselves, but they will be very vulnerable. Protection and management plans are often difficult to enact as they force changes in human activity, but it's crucial if this precious ecology is to survive. Bangor University's Tropical Marine Farming program is one of its most successful initiatives, attracting worldwide interest and financial support. These tanks contain some of the most sought-after specimens of the lucrative aquarium trade. In the wild, they're hunted using unscrupulous methods, hunted almost to extinction. Divers go onto the reef and they squirt cyanide solution onto the corals. This anaesthetizes the fish which then float out of the holes in the reef, from which they can be collected quite easily. The corals can't escape this toxin, so then die, as do many fish, which are of no value to the collector. 8 different species have been successfully spawned in Bangor's labs, including seahorses, clownfish and the highly prized cleaner shrimp. These fire-red species are the first ever to be bred in captivity. Natural marine conditions in the tropics are difficult to replicate in the lab. Bangor scientists have identified specialised feeds, optimum temperatures and light for the breeding of these rare creatures. They plan to share their findings at an international level, which will in turn protect vulnerable species in the wild. Always a drawcard to the North Wales resort town of Llandudno is its long sandy beach. But each year whole sections are washed away by strong currents. Expensive shoring up works are needed to preserve the picturesque coastline so vital to the Welsh economy. A wave machine is set in motion at Bangor University. By measuring the seabed's response to tidal movements, predictions can be made and management plans can be drawn up to protect our shifting coastlines. The impact of the groundbreaking work underway at Bangor's Ocean Sciences Unit has an immediacy and visibility unusual in scientific research. Its major strength is turning out specialists who can study and manage the world's oceans and related industries so they remain a healthy and abundant resource for future generations. It's one of the world's most famous steam locomotives, and now Stephenson's rocket is returning to London. Arriving at the Science Museum, it was carefully unpacked. The rocket is to form the centrepiece of a new gallery dedicated to 250 years of technology and engineering history. It's not the first steam locomotive, as people sometimes think, but the first steam locomotive to demonstrate what steam power could do on the railways. Stephenson's rocket has been away from London for nearly 3 years, during which time it travelled to museums and exhibitions all over the world. Alongside the Apollo 10 capsule that went around the moon in preparation for the first moon landing and other engineering achievements, curators are expecting the Science Museum's new gallery to be a huge success and drawing thousands of overseas visitors every year. And that's all for today. Join us again next time for a postcard look at interesting people, places and the arts.